I'm going to try a little bit and make some opening remarks, just in terms of where we are. There's been, I think in the last 30 years at least, a significant advance. I'm not going to say an explosion of information, but there have been significant amount of information coming out, particularly from surveys. There have been a number of excavations, not enough, we all say that, but again, we welcome everyone. They're not all published, sadly, but again, we make of them what we can. There is great potential. I occupy in my, well, I would say private life, my wife would probably say something else, that a twilight zone between history and archaeology. This is about an archaeological strategy, framework. I may say things which might be slightly offensive to archaeologists. Quite frankly, I don't care, because to me it's about how did people live in the past. And in this period, we should be drawing on every single bit of evidence we can find. It doesn't matter where it comes from. This is about multi or interdisciplinary working we all need to share. But we also will have preconceptions about what happened in the past. And we all sort of have a background, a rough idea of, what happened there was Culloden, and then the Highlands was opened up, and then there were clearances. I think it's a more complicated picture that I want to sort of suggest. The Highlands in this period, it was partly about clans, particularly at the political level, the military level. It was partly feudal, lots of feudal relationships still existing in the 18th century, for instance. But it was also a commercial society. People bought and sold at pretty much all levels of society. I don't want to be precious about what is vernacular and what isn't. An interesting point has come out, it's been mentioned several times, about the contrast between East and West. And it's really important in the historic period. Very roughly, quickly, there are the Highlands proper, and then there are the lowland fringe of the Highlands, whatever we're going to call them. And things are different. If you look at, for instance, the rents per acre, huge contrast between, say, Easter Ross around Inverness and the west and the north, in terms of money, income. And this, of course, is reflected in, say, the distribution of laird's houses. It's reflected in the size of parishes and the location of parish churches. It goes back a long way. It goes back further than I have any idea about. I have only glanced, I confess, at the Scarf national document. There are, however, I think, one or two statements which I would challenge. This is one of them, about the ubiquitous myth of the byre dwelling. It's slightly unfortunate that the authors, they talk about mainland areas such as Caithness and Aberdeenshire, but this is not actually referenced. It's also slightly unfortunate in the use of language and things like this. I hope that we will have a different document written in a different sort of style. I will be mentioning a few byre dwellings. This is Lerable in the Strath of Kildonan. There is a sort of a ubiquitous myth that the Highlands, is absolutely covered in molars, medieval or later rural settlement. Yes, this is true. And indeed, I'd sort of wandered the hills. but the number which have not been contaminated by subsequent land use, it's a small number. This is a survey by the Royal Commission under the Forestable Lands Survey. Very interesting. Little digression. This was I think, one of the only time in the modern era when the archaeological community went to the Secretary of State and actually was able to get more money. So this actually was quite an important point. It was about 1988. It gave a boost, actually, to studies, which in a sense, obviously, the official, if you like, end of it has dropped away, but the baton has indeed been taken up, and very well by community interests. We can learn a lot, though, from these sorts of settlements. I'm not going to spend too long on it, but in terms of, this is the magic bit, I think. Yes, we have two groups of houses, so these may well have been, a split settlement. We have some quite interesting rigs, not run rigs, but rigs. These could well be plough rigs because this is decent ground. We have a few kilns, corn drying kilns. Again, this gives us an idea of the range of structures in the settlement. There is, unfortunately, there's been some disturbance down here, so there's not a perfect settlement. But these are important places which, undisturbed. There are statements in the documentary record. This is from the mid-18th century. This is to do with Taxman Farms and what they did with their subtenants. When they, in a sense, this was the mains farm, if you like, for the taxman. They kept the best bit of land for themselves, and they tended to put the subtenants to what they call the skirt. We need to test this sort of thing. We need some examples. That's just an example, I think, where we can, we know something from documents. Let's go and find out what's happening. In other words, what the taxmen are doing, of course, is sort of replicating what the lairds are doing in their main farms. There are other things within fields. These could well be, we're not looking at rigs, we're looking at an area of spade cultivation, probably by cast chrome. This is a cleared settlement. And these lines, what we're looking at, these are probably divisions between, I'm going to call them run rig units or land divisions. So these aren't formed sort of through cultivation. These are about how the land is shared out in the township. So quite an interesting thing, and we're beginning to track them in various places, west coast of Rochester and also in Sutherland. The context of townships and houses is important. And that is, again, where we sort of have to link up our historical knowledge and what we see on the ground. This is Strath of Kildonan, is not in the Strath. It's up one of the burns. Why on earth are people living up here? It's a shilling site, really. But, in fact, there's at least one dwelling, and then there is a huge kiln, a significant, it's not huge, but it's a good-sized kiln, and you wouldn't expect it for here. Well, of course, this is where you have, in the late 18th century, this is illicit distillation, this is small tenant enterprise, there is peat, there is some privacy, and there's not obviously much growing ground, but you can import grain from Caithness, bring it on the back of ponies, distill and make some money, and live in a place where you wouldn't have been able to without that sort of enterprise. Some of you may know that I have a particular interest in outshots. You'll have to bear with me. What do I mean? I mean this bit here. This is the old cottage at Culloden Battlefield. It just gives us an idea of what on earth I'm talking about. This is in the Straths of Sutherland. We have a nice long dwelling house. This the byre end probably down at this end, down slope, and we have a quite nice little outshot here. These are rooms, you know, I wouldn't call them bed spaces, they're additional rooms. You can tell I'm not really a surveyor or indeed anything like this. This is just a measured sketch. It shows that certainly in Sutherland we have a certain sophistication. We have 2 outshots here in this particular dwelling. I imagine these are about 4 to 5 metres across, and again you can see there's a sort of byre drain at this end. Occasionally we find some extraordinary houses. This one here, it's about 35 metres in length, massive boulders. It's been robbed out because we're near a sheep farm enclosure. This is a sort of a massive gable end. And then this is looking into an outshot. It's very unusual in terms of what we're actually, in terms of survival, but here we have an outshot with a fireplace. This is an area, and again, this is the sort of thing which, you know, the radar is switched on. There's an area a few miles, I don't know, it could be 5, 6 miles, where there are just some massive buildings with massive stones. You know, what's going on here? Is this, you know, one crazy man? I don't know. The kiln associated with this house is something like 16 metres in length. It's extraordinary. Then we can map outshots. This is not. This is now sort of out of date map. I have no idea how you sort of put things on a map. I've lost all that sort of ability. But anyhow, what we have here are these triangles are 3 outshots in a house. Then we go down to 2s, and then down to the very smallest triangles are 1s. It gives us an idea. I mean, the hills are full of preclearance settlements, but it also helps us to sort of, by looking at this particular feature, we're actually helping to provide some sort of distribution of house types within the north, because these features are not really found west of this line. In general, houses on the east, and they extend obviously into Caithness, they extend down south, but houses on this eastern side are more sophisticated. I mean, I won't go into sort of the details, but this is just one way of looking at it. And where on the coast, where the big arable farms have been created and everything has been wiped away, we do at least have some estate plans, and we can see that John Mackay's house had an outshot at the top end. Later clearances are very useful in terms of, again, trying to understand the evolution of houses. This is from the north coast, Durness Way. This house, I think, houses cleared, about 3 families in this township, cleared in 1840. We have a fireplace in a gable end, so we're seeing signs of sophistication. And we're also seeing signs possibly of the clearance event, what happened after the event. You do find this in some places, particularly these later clearances, 1840s, where the walls are more substantial than the earlier pre-clearance houses, and so the incoming sheep farmer has done some demolition and done some sort of flattening of the rubble, presumably for safety's sake. Moving on to shillings. I think we have a lot to think about shillings, because actually I want to scrub out the idea that shillings are sort of something separate. Put them into a broader category, whether we're going to call it grazing or pastoral use or something like this. They are a subset. So, if you think of the grazing, we have, for instance, near the township, we have milk cow grass. We then have shillings for the milking stock. We then have places, grazings for the non-milking stock. We need a much more sophisticated understanding of grazing activity. There are, for instance, historical records for the movement of stock from other estates, movement of stock 40 miles to distant upland grazings. So the idea that sort of, there's a happy township with boys and girls and what have you, going to a shilling and having songs and laughter and all this sort of stuff, yes, that may have happened. But it's, that's just too much romance, too much Mary Queen of Scots stuff. We need a much better understanding of what's going on. Yes, we can map groups of shilling huts. This is very useful. This is, again, from Kildonna. This is Royal Commission work. And we can compare the size and shapes and things like this. Look at the numbers in the group. It doesn't mean an awful lot if we don't actually know which farm, which township the people were coming from. So I think this is from the Ben Lawyers project, which of course is out with the Highlands, but it was still a very important project. And I think, this mapping of the shillings within their farm boundaries and looking at the differences between the shilling huts and things like that, that's an important way to go. But I mentioned grazings, not shillings. This is a place called Slatterdale. It's an ancient hunting forest. It's an area where it's not full of shillings, but in the middle there is this substantial structure which I'm pretty sure, because I do have some documentary evidence for similar locations, this is where a herd lived, probably for an extended period, much longer than the normal sort of shilling period. And he would have been, almost certainly, he would have been looking after a significant number of non-milking cattle, and would have, been supplied with meal and things like this. So again, not every upland grazing is a shilling. But also shilling huts are in danger, because as you can see, this has been one of these forestry projects, and the machine has been in to make the mounds of the trees, and it has made some mounds in the middle of the hut. Thinking in terms of distributions, this, of course, is one of the still sites. It's near Scatwell. I think this is one of the products of the Gnosis initiative, which I think has been an exemplary. Sadly, I couldn't find the booklet. It's hidden in a box somewhere. But anyhow, this is a small party of Gnosis shock troops examining one of the structures. It is the map which has been produced of the many, many illicit stills in Strathconnell, which gives us an understanding of what they look like, where they are located, and this overall distribution in terms of what was happening in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. We need to do the same sort of thing with mills, because, again, this is a small horizontal mill. So this is the wheel pit, where the wheel would have gone round horizontally. quite a small structure probably, just extending a wee bit up there, round here, stone and turf wall. Again, we have to get away from the idea that, each township had a wee mill and what have you. There was this thing called thirlage, that landlords, again, wanted to maximise the income from their estates. They minimised the number of mills, and the people had to take their corn to be ground at the landlord's mill. So, if you're in the mid-18th century, what have you, the number of mills on some estates was ridiculously small. And people had to travel long distances. It's no wonder that they sort of kept the quern hidden under the bed. They tried to get round having to take it to the landlord's mill, which could have been 10, 15 miles away. No roads and what have you. So the explosion of mills, and this applies both to horizontal and vertical, it really happens with the abolition of thirlage. Now, that abolition is an estate thing, so it's a landlord decision, and it takes place at different times at different places. But, we need that sort of historical context. Something about crofting. We have an association of the creation of crofts with the clearances. And that's absolutely fine in quite a few areas. Massive clearances from the inland parts of Sutherland, the resettlement of people on the coast meant to become fishermen and what have you, and given small strips of land. However, in many areas, crofting was a later development, late 1840s, early 1850s, and so on. And so this had an impact in terms of how the crofts were laid out. In this particular township, in Assynt, crofts laid out in about 1850. Now, the landlord had already encouraged people to build decent houses. So it was difficult to then tell them to build another house when the land had been reorganised. So the impact, this is an 1880s plan, is that you have what we could call, the cluster associated with run-rig agriculture. It has remained, it has stayed in place. Yes, some houses have been built on the crofts, but a number are still within the cluster. And we also see that there is an element of, we can call it sort of intermixed, run-rig, that the crofts, some crofts at least, have comprise a number of separate portions. And indeed, this has a sort of impact on what we can see. Gordon will probably be able to explain where we are in better than I can. But anyhow, so we have the croft boundary coming down here. There's another one coming down here. But you can see underneath there is this, directions of a previous landscape which go up the hill. And the other thing is actually when they created the crofts here, they actually locked off some land which was being cultivated at that time. More marginal land which was being used by lazy beds, they put that away back into the grazings. Because the idea was that the crofters would improve the land within the croft. So what you have is a sort of, there are shades here of the Victorian high farming movement. Now, we have, of course, the huge, great farmsteadings of the East Coast. But what's happening on the crofts is, in a way, very similar because huge human effort was being put into land improvement. And odd enough, some of the drains are turning up now when people are digging up their crofts for new house sites. And you find these quite well-constructed drains from the sort of, the mid-19th century. Sometimes, however, there were estate initiatives which were on a sort of broader scale. This was a loch which was drained in 1849-50, coincident with the potato famine. So it was about relief work. This is up in the northwest on the limestone near Balnakeil. The land was divided out amongst the farms, hence this wall. However, they found that this was on limestone and the springs kept producing water. So in the end, they just sort of said, we're defeated and gave up, and now it's back to being a fishing lot. This is partly for Ian Robertson, who can now sit up. What on earth is this? This, of course, is where there's been an iron strainer. The strainer's been here, and the support running from the stone over here. This is a common grazing boundary. During the Highland Land War, the 1880s, a lot of pressure on landlords to increase the amount of grazing available to crofting tenants. This was part of an extension of common grazing. A new fence was built. That was part of the stipulation. And then the landlord gave an additional area. So this fence was taken down, and another one was put up. In recent years, I have to confess, I have become a convert to artifacts. And I'm actually, I welcome actually the emphasis on artifacts which is in the Scarf document. I mean, again, we have questions here which are really difficult to answer, and they probably again need both historians and archaeologists to get involved. Because artifacts actually, consumption, material, possessions, this is very important to our understanding of Highland history, 17th, 18th centuries. What is happening? We know about the lairds, enjoying their luxury items, but actually consumption, conspicuous consumption, was going down the social scale. How far was it going? Where were the things coming from? So, from the historian's point of view, we have lists from merchants. This is a sort of list of a merchant in east coast of Sutherland at Golspie from 1779. There are items here which obviously might show up in archaeological excavation, and there are items here which probably won't. One of the most important items, oddly enough, is indigo, because it's clear that colour was becoming a big deal for people. Vegetable dyes are very nice, but actually people were looking for something a bit brighter. Now, inevitably, you had to have the money to pay for this, but it's clear that, even by the 1760s, a scarlet coat, was a desirable item. And at the bottom of the list, too, is lots of skins. These are sort of things which travelling peddlers would have picked up. So, your travelling peddler would buy goods from the merchant and then would go on a circuit, and part of his income would come from picking up skins from people. So again, this was a way in which people could buy a coloured handkerchief or something, and so on. Obviously, we really welcome, this is from the excavation of Caen near Helmsdale, a preclearance house, but it's quite late. It's 1826. We're looking at Staffordshire pottery. Again, we could talk a lot about how these things got there. I will just say, for instance, that in the 1730s and 40s, Inverness merchants were importing direct from London small manufactured items. I suspect because Scottish manufacturers couldn't produce the items cheaply enough. But as the 18th century went on, Scottish manufacturers could produce these cheap goods, much. But even then, you find, in 1820s, you have actually local merchants in Dornoch, Golspie, and places like this. They're contracting, buying from merchants, manufacturers in places like Leeds and what have you. So anyhow, long distance trade. Moving, we're going to obviously have to put the foot down, aren't we? Taxman's houses. This shred here of little walling, within it there is some really poor quality lime mortar, lots of seashells and what have you. And I'm pretty sure it's known as Count Ivor, the head of the big house. And this was sort of the end of the road. And I think we can link it with, this is a comprisement or valuation of the house made in 1812. The house was actually built not long before. So it's a taxman's house of the early 1800s. And it's quite interesting. I mean, I won't go through it all, but, this is a lime and mortar house. It has an upstairs. It might just be 1.5 stories. One of the interesting things, actually, is the value of the farm buildings, which actually is much less than the house. So, the investment has gone into the status house rather than, where the money is actually created, the buyer and what have you. A little bit about early shepherds' houses, because, again, this is a source. We know these are places where there have been shepherds living, but they have then been abandoned. So this house here, we know there was a shepherd here in the 1820s from a militia list. It doesn't feature in the 1841 census. This gives us an idea of houses of this period. No fireplace, for instance. You have to look very carefully into the voids among the walls, and you will find clay or earth mortar. This is another one. This was later used as a sheep bank. The house is actually this bit here. The walls are poor. It's been buttressed, and the interior corners are actually rounded. And again, we have a growing amount of evidence about houses which are sort of early, mid 19th century with, rounded corners and what have you. This is another one further inland, and we can link it up with valuations, shepherd's houses on a farm, and here at the bottom we have a hinging loom, a hanging lum, in other words, some form of canopy chimney instead of a fireplace within the wall. In this particular one, this is a shepherd's house. The main house is architect, designed and built 1860s, but the building behind, which became a byre, was in fact the old shepherd's house. We need to look around crofting areas. This is in Easter Ross. It's Tarvey. You hit the crofting area and then you look into the more marginal sort of ends. This is extraordinary area, and most of all the modern houses, if you like, are much further low down the slope. But it was very quickly evident that the whole of the summit of this hill had been cultivated and worked, and there's some wonderful ruins to find. This needs a Knossos team. I don't care what you're doing next week, go there. And there are turf gablets. There are the crux slots in the wall of particular type. And then there are other crux slots which are of a different type, but within the same sort of area. So lots to find and discover and to, survey. We also get, in some, small tenant buildings, these are crow steps. And it's quite interesting sometimes how the small tenants in building their houses will use stylistic features which are found on estate buildings or on, manses and so on. Quite interesting to sort of trace the distribution of these things. New materials, corrugated iron, but actually much more exciting, concrete. And this is an area where early concrete was in use in the late 1860s, early 1870s. And we can see the building in the background with the various lifts. Where did the materials come from? On the west coast, of course, we had steamers bringing in stuff from Glasgow. So some of our croft houses, we have machine sawmilled doors and windows. On the east coast, however, we have more local sources of supply. This is 1888. We have wreck deals, we have red deals. Some could be imported, some could be from Scottish wood. I've actually been having, and this is following a PhD student, I think at UHI, who's been looking at public health, and more recent sort of literally weeks, I've been turning my mind to the supply of water, but also where did people go? The historical evidence is very small, but it's clear, and this is a thing where archaeology and oral history can come together. It is clear that in the 1950s, 60s, there were many people without any convenience. So, a few thoughts. The importance of multidisciplinary, the importance of systematic survey, wider distributions, but also then accompanied by targeting. Looking at different types of buildings or particular features in buildings, looking for undisturbed townships where we can see the whole thing, and then townships and grazings, not just a little group of shieling huts, but the whole thing. And then I just want to say, about the vernacular, it is most at risk, and risk to me is just as important in our framework as many of the other sort of important questions. Thank you.